Good evening all to the 80th session of the weekly huddle. My name is Dr. Anup Agrawal. I am a cardiologist at Care Hospital, Banjara Hills. And joining me today is my friend and co-host, Praneeth. He's also a cardiologist working at Care Hospital. Most of you are already familiar with the weekly huddle format. Basically, just to give you a brief overview of what the discussion is, the huddle is an unscripted audience level interaction where we address common clinical scenarios that we encounter in our daily practice. And the idea of the huddle is to bring our casual discussions onto a little bit of more organized platform like this one. And we try to translate established knowledge to clinical practice, taking practical aspects into consideration. This is not a speaker and audience model, rather a casual interaction, which means any one of you can raise your hand and provide input, your thoughts, or ask a question about the discussion. We do this every Wednesday. It's at 7 p.m. and we try to close it by 8 o'clock. This is our 80th session and we have been doing it for more than 1.5 years now. Today's topic has already been shared with our huddle attendees. I will just brief the case. I will ask my co-host Praneeth to give his initial impression, and then we will go on to our attendees about what their impression is. We also have Dr. Vijay Seshadri with us. He is a psychiatrist who will be helping us navigate through today's topic. So this is a 38-year-old female. She came to my cardiology OPD last month for evaluation of non-specific chest pain and palpitations. The symptoms were going on for about 3-4 months. They were very vague and non-specific in nature. And after her initial workup, which included an ECG and some basic lab, were normal, I pretty much gave her a reassurance and told her that she's fine. She don't need to really worry too much about it. As the meeting ended, she also mentioned that she had been having difficulty initiating sleep for the past 3 to 4 months. While her work schedule is fixed, where she pretty much starts her work at around 10 o'clock in the morning and is done by 6 p.m., because she works from home, her activity is mostly restricted inside her house only, and very little exercise or physical activity outside her house. She does mention that she does not have any major stressor in her daily life. In her past medical history, she has diagnosed hypothyroidism, which has been going on for a few years now. She takes thyroxine supplement, and her TSH during this current visit was 2.3, which I considered it as normal. So basically, we are trying to discuss today about how to manage or how to counsel her about this sleeping disorder that she's having, where she's having difficulty initiating sleep for the past 3-4 months. She does mention that once she falls asleep, which typically is by 1 p.m. or so, 1 to 2 p.m. or so, she doesn't have a problem continuing sleep. It is mostly the initiation that is a problem. So the points that we are going to discuss under the headings are what kind of behavioral therapy that we can advise to her to improve her insomnia, and what are the behavioral therapies as a general that we can advise to our patients which are easy to adopt. On the same line, what are the essential sleep hygiene components which we can advise our patients and which would be fairly reasonable to adopt as well. Is there a role of early pharmacotherapy in these kind of cases? We know that these days benzodiazepines and non-benzodiazepine sedatives, they are quite common in clinical practice. They have been rendered pretty safe at the doses that we have been using. So is there a role for early pharmacotherapy in these kind of patients, and when to refer these patients to a psychiatrist in terms of what are the red flags that we should be identifying, which if present, we certainly should ask our psychiatrist colleagues to take a look. So these are the broad headings under which we will be discussing today's topic. I'll ask Praneeth to give his initial impression, then I'll ask my other attendees, followed by Dr. Seshadri for his expert comments. Praneeth.
Yeah, good evening, Anup and other colleagues. So this patient I probably will give a judgmental statement, but in general, all the software employees, I believe, have a bit of an erratic sleep schedule, mostly because of their hours of work or their work timings. They mostly have to match with their office, which is usually either in US or in Western world, where the timings are not as per the Indian schedule. So that is where their hours of work are something erratic, something starting at 3 o'clock, someone starting at 6 o'clock, which is where it becomes difficult. So first thing I would like to know are what are the hours of work? So what are your hours of work for your patient, Anup? Hello, Anup? Okay, I think there seems to be some trouble with Anup, but I'll continue. So first thing I would like to look at hours of work, because this again easy said than done, where asking a person to completely change their schedule is difficult. But if their timings are difficult with the normal Indian standards, I would ask them to kind of adjust to them. The trouble occurs because of the break again, where you are working from Monday to Friday at one schedule, and again Saturday, Sunday is off, where again the pattern kind of changes, where you try to adopt to the Indian timings. So because of this frequent change, I believe sticking to one proper sleeping schedule becomes difficult, and that kind of changes the circadian rhythm and helps in or makes it difficult to get proper sleep. Second problem, I believe, is we all are kind of addicted to our gadgets. Cell phone is a part of necessary gadget in everyday's life, where most of the work is done under cell phone. And obviously, with the social media that is there, we kind of get addicted to this phone, which we carry along with to our bed. And the blue light which comes from the cell phones kind of prevents melatonin secretion, and that probably contributes to the difficulty in getting sleep. So that is one hygiene habit that I would tell to this patient and to my patients, as to avoid getting exposure to this blue light from the gadgets that we use, to stop using them. If possible, try to get a habit of reading a book. These days, these Kindle device is something which I would suggest to take the patients, which does not emit the blue light and easy on eyes, and probably can help you get a sleep. That is another thing. Regarding therapy, I do not want to start away therapy, but if patient is getting too much of trouble, I would say I have a low threshold of starting them, because I believe getting proper sleep is more important than fighting and resisting to get sleep. So I have a low threshold, and I start with alprazolam, 0.25 milligrams as a starting dose, and then take it forward, and equally emphasizing on changing the habits. Regarding the red flags on when to refer a psychiatrist, these are some things which I do not know, and I'm glad to know from today's discussion from Dr. Sheshadri. So these are my take on the questions that you posted, Anup.
Thank you very much, Praneeth. I think that schedule with her probably was not that much of an issue, because she was pretty much fixed on how she was working. It was a little bit on the activity front, where it was pretty much a monotonous life for her, where she was not going out of house and whatnot. Your points are well taken. We will go forward with the rest of our attendees. We'll seek their opinion. So Dr. Shankar is a senior physician who have been with us for pretty much 50 episodes now. Dr. Shankar, what would be your impression about this particular case that we are discussing?
Good evening to all. This is a common problem we encounter in day-to-day practice. Before going into the problem, we take a history of the comorbid conditions in this patient, like medical conditions where the any respiratory, not only this case, but regularly we take the history of any medical conditions or psychiatric disorders or any neurological conditions, whether the patient is suffering, we should find it out. Delirium, chronic pain, especially in cancer, respiratory distress syndrome, uremia, asthma, thyroid disorders, nocturia because of benign prostatic hyperplasia, or any other urinary problems. Whether patient is having high BP, diabetes, heart disease, obstructive sleep apnea, restless leg movements, whether any medical conditions, when the patient is having any insomnia associated with these medical conditions, we should find it out. Because if we treat these medical conditions, that problem may be mitigated. And psychiatric disorders like severe depression, anxiety disorders, manic disorders, panic attacks, and impulse controlled disorders, substance use disorders. These psychiatric disorders are red flag signs. They should be taken care of by psychiatrists only. And the neurological conditions also we come across, like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. They also complain of insomnia. And that bidirectional will be there. Sleep aggravates Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, they aggravate the insomnia. So the bidirectional flow will be there. So after going through these medical, psychiatric and neurological conditions, then we take a detailed history of alcohol, whether the patient is a smoker, whether regular coffee drinker, but especially in the evening, whether he is having any habit of taking coffee, and substance use like cocaine or cannabinoids, others. Then we take, is there any history of stress in him, or pain or physical discomfort also that is causing insomnia? We have to take into consideration. And especially coming to the sleep history, as we have encountered here, that is a sleep onset, that is a difficulty in initiation of sleep. Then sleep maintenance, whether difficulty in frequent awakening in between, any late insomnia, that is early morning, especially the later third of the night or a quarter of night, that is early morning awakening, or non-restorative sleep quality, and patient inability to return back to sleep after awakening. So these sleep histories we should take into consideration before we switch on to line of therapy. Then this first and foremost is a cognitive behavioral therapy, non-pharmacological. This will be enlightened by Dr. Seshadri better than me. But the sleep hygiene, we ask the patient to follow. We educate the patient regarding a good sleep hygiene. Go to bed only when sleepy. Use the bed and bedroom only for sleeping. Avoid watching TV, reading books, or working on computers and etc. on bed or bedroom. If still awake after 20 minutes, leave the bedroom. Even after 20 minutes or 30 minutes, if he doesn't get sleep, then he should come out and take a bath or a meditation, pranayama, and return to bed only when he becomes sleepy. And get up at same time every morning, regardless of the amount of sleep during the night. Even if he sleeps very few hours also, but he should have a habit of getting up early morning, every morning at the same time. Discontinue caffeine or nicotine, at least in the evening, if not completely. Establish a daily exercise regime and avoid alcohol as it may disrupt. Everybody thinks that alcohol gives a good sleep, but it disrupts the continuity of the sleep. That has to be kept in mind. And limit the fluids in the evening, because patient will have nocturia, and that disturb the sleep. And learn and practice the relaxation techniques like pranayama, and establish a bedtime ritual and a routine time for going to bed. And avoid daytime naps. This is very important. If the patient is having a habit of taking daytime naps, and it will be difficult to go to bed right time. Maintain the environment should be ambient, and it should be cool, comfortable, and quiet sleeping environment. So this sleep hygiene has to be kept in mind before we embark onto the pharmacological therapy. Here, the patient is having difficulty in initiation of sleep. So I prefer, because DORAs, they are not available in India, that a dual orexin receptor antagonist, like suvorexant or lemborexant, they are not available in India, but they are very expensive also. But in the Ramelteon, that is a melatonin receptor antagonist, that can be given. And the benzodiazepines and non-benzodiazepines are quite known to everybody. The benzodiazepines like lorazepam, temazepam, flurazepam, and non-benzodiazepines like zolpidem, zaleplon, zopiclone or esgopiclone, they are non-benzodiazepines. So I prefer to give, but DORAs, that is dual orexin receptor antagonist, but they are not available and expensive. But next best is Ramelteon. 8 milligram tablets are there, available as the Ramitax. But as usual, commonly available are benzodiazepines and the non-benzodiazepines. I prefer to give non-benzodiazepines in this case, zolpidem or zaleplon or zopiclone or esgopiclone. There are other things may be taken over by the other speakers, like what are the drugs to be taken regarding the sleep maintenance, late insomnia, and the patient has got a vulnerability to substance usage disorder, comorbid depression or anxiety. If there is a treatment resistant insomnias, we go for antidepressants and antipsychotics. One thing I want to highlight is, even after initiation of sleep, if the patient is disturbed in the middle of the night, then the sleep maintenance, there is a low dose of doxepin I prefer to give, especially 3 to 6 milligrams. The same doxepin will be used as an antidepressant at the dosage of 75 to 150 milligrams. But here we give only 3 to 6 milligrams. Low dose doxepin will maintain the sleep. So this is my non-pharmacological and pharmacological therapy. And I've got many doubts at the end. I will ask Dr. Seshadri to get clarified regarding the circadian rhythms and the jet lags and all. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much, sir. Here I will invite any of my attendees if they have any questions or comments regarding this topic before I head on to Dr. Seshadri for his expert comments. Okay, if not, then Dr. Seshadri, if I get to you, you heard at least two viewpoints, one from Praneeth, which was particularly related to this patient, and then a general overview from Dr. Shankar. I just want to get your impression, A, about this particular case, and B, about some of the points that I have picked up during the discussion. A lot of things have been said about blue light filter, about maintaining a routine schedule, talking about a bedtime or a sleep ritual. fixed time to bed versus fixed time to wake up, go to bed only when you are sleeping, not to use bedroom for other activities except sleeping. So there are a lot of these things which are mentioned. In your opinion, in your practice, what are the things which are actually practical? What are the things that actually work for the patient? And then if you could shed some highlight about what is this cognitive behavioral therapy, which we have been learning and writing in the exams since our MBBS, but I have no idea what CBT is all about. And then at the end, if you could just throw some light on benzodiazepines, if there is any one benzodiazepine better than the other, and as a general practitioners, what are the specific things that we should care about when we prescribe benzodiazepine? So a lot of questions for you, Dr. Seshadri, if you could just take it one by one. Thank you.
Right. Good evening, Dr. Anup. Thanks for inviting me over. I did not prepare for this topic. I thought this topic should be about what we actually do in our practical, in our clinical setting, and rather than to talk about a lot of jargon that is there in literature. Now, I would actually think if we were to work in a general hospital setting with a large cardiology team, the 38-year-old lady with a non-specific chest pain is somebody who would have come to you and within a period of time would have gone to some other cardiologist and would have gone to some other cardiologist. The reason why I say is this. What typically starts happening is when as a clinician, we are evaluating a patient and the workup is coming negative, one of the feedbacks we tend to give is that you are fine and there is absolutely no problem at all. Correct me if I'm wrong. But when we say this, our intent is very good in conveying to the individual that yes, indeed, you're not suffering from any major problem. But the individual goes back and says that, well, I'm happy I have no major problem. My cardiac workup has come negative, but why am I getting these chest pains? And then that's when the saga really starts. Because I go back again to an ER in the middle of the night with a chest pain, everything else is again evaluated back again, and then I don't get the answers because they say everything is fine. Now, the challenge with this everything is fine is we are telling the patient that you have no problem, but the patient is not finding an answer to why he or she is experiencing the pain. Secondly, what then starts happening is I think you are unnecessarily worried and stressed, so you are probably having pain. And the individual says, I'm fine. I just got my promotion. I went on a nice holiday. We didn't have COVID and we are doing great. I'm not worried about everything. But then the very often the clinicians things comes in. Look, we've evaluated you completely. You have no problem at all. I think you're just thinking about this pain. You don't really have the pain. I think you're just thinking about it. I think you're just unnecessarily worried. That's when we see the patients then start going on shopping with multiple doctors and multiple cardiologists. So even though the topic of discussion today was sleep, I think because you said she came in with a non-specific chest pain and palpitations, I would actually think whether is this individual going through some kind of an anxiety disorder. Now, conventionally, we had assumed about 20 years back was if a person were to develop anxiety or to experience any other emotional symptoms, then he or she must have an evident external trigger factor or a stress that is going on for one to feel emotional or anxious. What we understand today very clearly is even in the absence of any trigger factors, even in the absence of any other emotional factors, people can experience spontaneously occurring anxiety attacks. People can go through depression, even though everything else is going on fine in life. So what we may need to look at is, in this individual, when you have given the reassurance that everything is fine and there is no need to worry, is this patient coming back to you? Is this patient texting you back saying, look, I'm still having a chest pain over here. Should I come back to emergency? Something is not right. So while sleep is an associate issue, I would still wonder whether are we looking at some form of an anxiety disorder, which is kind of presenting over here. Now, if this is a wonderful patient who says, I'm somebody who wants to be cautious, so I had a pain. Healthcare tells me I should go and get it evaluated. Now you've reassured me. I have no problem. I'm not going to worry about it. If we are lucky to get somebody like that, then that's really great. Then we need to see whether are we looking at more of an isolated sleep issue. But however, if this individual is constantly coming back with recurrent chest pains, what I do is we try to explain to them that a lot of people can have unexplained medical symptoms which may not be associated with any major medical condition. However, the symptoms are real. Your pain is real. You're not imagining the pain, but the attribution that you are probably doing to the pain, because inadvertently we are likely to see my uncle had a heart attack, so I got worried, will I have it? And then I went to the doctor, he said everything is fine. So then I just opened up Google and then searched for it, and then it said about this particular problem, and could it be that? So a large number of people, when we actually see them, they actually come in with anxiety, and the sleep issue is very often a symptom of the associated anxiety state. So if that is so the case, I think first thing is educating them about how symptoms are real but are not associated with any major medical condition. And if we think that the anxiety is significant, then we look at a medication plan. We'll probably, when time permits, we can discuss it. We'll discuss it later. And if I'm looking at a primary anxiety disorder with sleep being a part of it, then besides educating them, which is I think the first thing to do, then I might look at a combination of medication. If the anxiety is significant, I would probably look at one of the SSRIs like escitalopram or sertraline or fluoxetine along with a benzodiazepine. Now, what is one of the major concerns that we see in a very large number of people, especially above 40s, 50s, hypertension, diabetes, coronary artery disease? If you look at the last drug in that list, I mean, it could be the sixth drug or the eighth drug, invariably we end up seeing a benzodiazepine on the list. So while giving, if I look back at this lady and I said, okay, she doesn't have anxiety, she's very clear, her explanation worked well, she just has a problem with sleep. Am I going to look at a short course of medication? Am I going to educate her on sleep hygiene? If I'm going to give her a short course of medication, any one of the benzodiazepines is okay. It could be lorazepam, alprazolam, as Dr. Praneet said, but it has to be a short course because a very large number of people unfortunately end up becoming benzodiazepine dependent because they come in with anxiety which presents a sleep issue. Once they start taking a benzodiazepine, they start feeling better, and they probably sometimes don't follow up back, or sometimes at a busy clinician's office, uh, we take time to explain once, twice, and then we say, look, you're doing good with this drug. Why don't you just continue with this drug? And then you see over a period of time, they've started becoming dependent on it. And then, okay, so they're on clonazepam. They've done well for 6 months. Suddenly they become now dependent. So clonazepam isn't working anymore. Then they see somebody else. Somebody else changes them to lorazepam 2 milligrams, and they're doing much, much better. But the challenge, what happened was you just switched one benzo to the other benzo. We didn't really fix the problem. So then they become well for a reasonable period of time, but then the dependence really tends to continue. So if I were to look back at this lady, if I had to think of anxiety, I would look at seeing how we are going to educating her about anxiety, looking at medical or non-medical methods for dealing with anxiety, maybe a short course of benzodiazepine at best. But if anxiety is not really a problem, and let's just assume this lady had just was a friend of Dr. Anup, and she said, look, I'm having a problem with sleep. I don't have these chest pains or palpitations. I think I would probably go a lot with what Dr. Shankar probably mentioned earlier in terms of certain behavioral techniques. Now, um, one is what are fancy things that are written in literature about things that we can do. And the second thing is what is it that we really do in routine clinical practice? I think very often there is a huge divide between the two. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy is a structured form of psychological therapy which has two components, the cognitive component and the behavioral component. It is It is usually done anywhere over a period of 8 to 14 or 8 to 16 sessions, where you teach alternative methods of dealing with anxiety related thoughts, not you giving a reassurance to the patient, but helping him look at how he can deal, he or she can deal with some of these thoughts, and then teach certain behavioral methods. The behavioral methods could be anything. It could be relaxation training. It could be about dealing with exposure to situations which trigger anxiety. It could be dealing with a variety of situations which causes negative emotional responses within the mind. So it's a very structured therapy. Why? I mean, probably not going to go into too much of details about what CBT is, but CBT, the number of people who practice CBT is very, very few. There are very few properly trained clinical psychologists who are actually available who actually practice CBT. So we don't normally send patients of ours to CBT because getting an appointment for somebody to do CBT is not easy. And number two, the number of people who practice this is very, very low. There could be millions of people who may be claiming to talk about CBT, but people who actually practice is very low if I were to take Hyderabad itself. So what we would probably look at doing is one, reassuring. Uh, do we really need to pharmacologically treat is a question that comes in. If at all pharmacological treatment is an option, we are going to consider any one of the benzodiazepines is okay. Whatever one is comfortable with, if it is alprazolam or lorazepam or clonazepam, zolpidem, all these are okay. Anything is okay. Um, if there is a very mild anxiety, not a long-standing anxiety, then maybe a benzodiazepine more than a zolpidem might be better because if it's anxiolytic. But remember, it has to be a short course and then it has to be tapered off. I think the iatrogenic contribution towards people developing benzodiazepine dependence is extremely high. And when we then eventually see people, we see them on fairly very high doses of benzos and they're not able to get off that medication. It becomes very, very difficult. So probably looking at, I mean, again, looking just back at this index lady, looking at anxiety, seeing if there is depression, educating, looking at short course of medication options, it could be a benzo. But if we think somebody is going to need long-term medication option, then a benzodiazepine is not the drug that I'm going to continue somebody more than a month or two. I'm probably going to look at other medications which might be safer in the long-term perspective. So we often use medications like mirtazapine, which is primarily an antidepressant, but is also an effective drug for chronic sleep management. We could probably look at using the thiopine, which also Dr. Shankar spoke about, one of the tricyclic antidepressants. And there is this another drug called as trazonil, which is also quite safe and effective in a long-term perspective. But let's just say we have somebody coming in with primary sleep related anxiety. So you could see people coming in with health related anxiety, coming in with chest pain and panic attacks recurrently. But there could be people who come with just sleep related anxiety who say, okay, doc, you know, once it's 6 o'clock in the evening, the tape recorder in my mind starts off. Am I going to sleep well today? Am I not going to sleep well today? What happens if I cannot sleep? How am I going to be? Am I going to get mad or insane if I'm not able to get to sleep? Now, if we see this as a fairly long-standing problem with having been on multiple pharmacological trials with partial response, then this is my candidate who probably I'm going to look at a CBT therapist for this individual because no pharmacological management is really going to address the problem immediately. I think we need to look at a more definitive CBT-based management over a 2-3 months period of time where they get to understand that the problem is not sleeping, but the problem is worrying about not being able to sleep and the consequences of not sleeping. So I think I'll just stop rattling off over here and then probably take it further comments or questions.
Sir, thank you so much. I think you answered most of the questions. I just have one question and then I will get back to my attendees. Amongst behavioral therapy and this so-called sleep hygiene and whatnot, If you could just tell us few things that you tell your patients which are more practical to adopt, which work better as compared to just going down the list that a textbook or an article offers to us.
Yeah, so I think if we were just not to look at medical management and we just talk of what simple things that you could do as a clinician in your outpatient, in a very busy outpatient practice where you don't have much time, I think sleep hygiene is really the most important thing. I think turning off the gadgets by about 7 o'clock in the evening, not having any gadget related stimulation in the night, 30 minutes on the bed, not able to sleep, that's fine. Come to the next room, read a book, but no electronic stimulation at all. Let it be 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. Do not sleep beyond 6 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning, and just practice that on a regular basis. Cutting down on caffeine. Do not use the bed for any other activity. Your reading has to be in the other room. You're working on your laptop. You're watching your TV has to be in the other room. Just maintain good sleep hygiene. Essentially, no other activity. We need to allow the mind to get the cue that if you are lying down on the bed, it is for sleep. The challenge here is the mind now knows I get onto the bed, then I have to look at all the world things, check my WhatsApp, my social media. So no gadgets, getting up regularly at the same period of time, regardless of whether you've been able to sleep the previous night or not. A lot of people like, I tried exercising for 4 days and looked at the weighing machine as to how many kilos I must have lost. Unlikely that's going to happen. It's going to happen over a period of time. Similarly, when you start practicing sleep hygiene, it also needs to be done for a sufficiently good period of time for it to become a major impact towards improving your sleep quality. I think this is one thing that probably it is something that we say it millions of times. Very honestly, in routine clinical practice, not many people follow that because people want something instantaneous. People want something that gives them immediate gratification and helps fix the problem, which it does. If you give a benzodiazepine, it does. But the challenge comes is if it is a chronic, long-standing issue, then you're just contributing towards that patient's misery, albeit you're just giving a bright light for a short period of time, because then he will just continue with the cycle.
You mentioned about instant gratification and as much non-scientific as it is, the truth of the matter is we want that and our patients want that, and benzodiazepine is able to fulfill that. The question is there a non-pharmacologic measure which is going to give that biceps immediate that we are looking for? You go to the gym once and you get a big biceps. Is there something we can do which if I start doing today itself, I will get a good night's sleep tonight? Is there a trick? Do you know a trick? If you could share it with us.
And no, I'm still searching for that one. I'm sorry, I don't know that. but one thing is there. When we talk to a lot of people who worry about sleep, will I sleep today or not? Helping them understand that it's okay not to sleep and it's okay for the tape recorder to come on, but don't look at it as your final exams. Helping them understand that the worrying is actually impacting the sleep. So let's not target improving the sleep, but let's target cutting down the emotional response to the worry. That probably seems to help some people at least.
And very often we also see patients complain that they have a train of thoughts going in their mind when they go to bed. They don't necessarily need to be stress-inducing train of thoughts. Sometimes there is a song that you catch in your brain. Sometimes there is a discussion that you catch in your brain. You can't shake it off, but it doesn't let you fall asleep. Do you encounter these scenarios? I'm sure you do. And what are the ways to handle that?
So again, we need to look at how often is this happening. Suppose I have had one-off bad day today, and I've had a major, an emotional-laden discussion with somebody. I've been feeling a little let down, and I'm upset today. It's okay. I mean, you're feeling upset, and if that's impacting your sleep for a couple of days, that's all right. There are no major alarms. Because you didn't sleep well for 2 nights or 3 nights doesn't mean that we need to do something drastic about it. Hopefully, emotional response that came in because of the issues should resolve and things should get better. So we don't do anything about it. Now, as to the question that you said about the music playing within the mind. Now, okay, so there is a psychological symptom called as obsessive auditory imagery. Many people suffer from this, but they don't really know that there is this. It's actually a part of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, but they don't have. So what they basically have is they say, I have the same music that is playing to me. So I heard a catchy tune last night, and I enjoyed it and I let it go. But I'm getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I need to go to the toilet, and the same damn catchy tune is playing within my mind. That is fine. Now I heard a miserable song, but for the last 1 month, the same tune is playing in my mind all the time. I want to speak today in this webinar, and then it's still that same music which is parallelly playing. I want to eat my lunch, but the same damn music is playing. So if it is something which is persistent, pervasive, it could be possible whether the individual is having a variant of OCD called as obsessive auditory imagery. It's a very often missed source of problem for people with chronic insomnia, and they actually suffer from OCD or obsessive auditory imagery. But there could be many other people who may also have, there could be chronic worriers. Their patterns are that temperamentally they tend to worry about everything. So anything trivial was to happen, or they had some activities to do the next day, the worrying tape recorder starts off in the previous night. So again, if it is something which is in terms of a chronic worrier, a chronic personality pattern that is there, then we may need to look at a plan more definitive, which could incorporate both pharmacology as well as looking at maybe some form of psychological therapy, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, maybe something like that we would probably have to do. But if these are just short thoughts that come into the mind for a short period of time before I sleep, if it is something which is mild, occasional, I won't really recommend something specifically. There are some people who like to listen to very soft music. There are some people who like to meditate, and it can help. But we probably need to see what kind of patterns it is there before we take it.
Thank you, sir. We heard most of it. I was actually paying a lot of attention to your words because there is a significant background noise at your end. But we heard your words. It is just that it is putting a stress on us to understand what you're saying. Sir, one last question before I open the forum for others as well. How bad is this afternoon nap? Is it something that is really a problem, or we are really finding it as a scapegoat for insomnia?
So the challenge is how long is the afternoon nap? I think a lot of literature does say that a good 15-20 nap at maximum, at least about 8-9 hours before your nighttime sleep is okay and is not likely to infringe into your nighttime sleep quality. However, what we tend to see is people who are unable to sleep well in the night kind of compensate by sleeping or napping during the daytime. And that's where the challenge really happens. So we see people who are saying, I hardly sleep for 4 hours in the night, but I get up at 8:30 in the morning. Again, from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, I sleep. Again, from 3 to 3:45, I sleep. So if it is multiple installment-based sleep during the daytime and not just a short afternoon nap, then that's a challenge, because we would rather work on improving the nighttime quality of sleep rather than looking at dealing with daytime sleep. But if it's a short nap for about 15-20 minutes, somebody is able to do that, I think it's okay. I think it should be all right.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. I will get on to rest of my attendees, and if they have any questions, I will get you back on. I am muting your mic now. Okay, so I hope that most of the attendees, they got the very comprehensive and practical assessment that Dr. Seshadri brought. If anybody has got any questions or comments, either you can type in the chat box or raise your hand, and you'll get a chance to discuss your thought. In the meantime, I'll get a couple of more opinions. We have Dr. Vijay Reddy with us. Dr. Vijay, how do you treat insomnia in your clinical practice? I know you are a cardiologist, but what is your go-to move? Do you refer your patients to psychiatrists, or do you treat your patients with behavioral therapy and medications or whatnot? Vijay sir, I hope you are able to hear me. Dr. Vijay Reddy. Okay, there may be some technical issue at his end. Anybody else wants to opine on this particular topic? Okay, if I may ask Dr. Somaraju for his opinion about insomnia as a general, about this particular patient, and anything that you may want to add with the discussion that is going on today. Somaraju sir.
Good evening, Anup, and all of you, Dr. Seshadri, good evening again. And I heard most of you speaking, and I agree with many of the things that are already said, except one or two things I just want to add up. What was the presenting complaint?
Sir, the presenting complaint was mostly palpitations, but associated with some vague chest and back discomfort.
Okay, is she married?
She is married. She has got 2 kids.
Okay. Did the husband accompany her?
Sir, husband did not accompany her.
Okay. So I'll put it this way. I won't draw too many conclusions from it, except telling you during these issues related to software engineer and the type of work, and their sitting on the computer morning to evening, and devices and blue light and all that were already talked about. And we do suggest to most of them to use glasses which filter blue light. Apart from saying that, it's important to know during these COVID times, this phenomenon called loneliness plays a serious role in affecting most of the things we do. It is one of the important reasons for depression, anxiety, what you may call it. Psychiatrists call it by many names, but loneliness is a serious issue during these COVID times. Their husband not accompanying her also gives me some idea. She may be going through what she is going through. And it's very important to first assure her that she has no cardiac problem if she doesn't have a cardiac problem. And that is the first step. Dr. Seshadri already pointed out. But lifestyle alterations, namely physical activity during the daytime and exercise of some kind, need not go for a long walks, etc. these days. It can be a strength exercises. She is young and she is otherwise healthy. Strength exercises can be only 15-20 minutes. And then alterations in the way, the food they eat. And the food we eat is medicine. Not to be obese, not to be overweight. And and rest of the things, most of the things are already said. I'll again emphasize, loneliness plays a serious role in all these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for those comments. One of the questions that I got in chat box is a little bit more advice on medication. Dr. Gopikrishna, if you could be a little objective on what exactly you want us to go over the medications. Dr. Seshadri pointed out, yes, Dr. Gopikrishna, if you could just highlight what exactly you want.
Yeah, actually, it's a frequent, it's a common problem nowadays. Of course, definitely, we can stop the medications like decongestive therapies or beta stimulants and even nasal decongestants and whatever the list. We rule out the first those medications which are causing the sleep disturbance. But the thing is, commonly we tend to use the benzodiazepines, but I think when Shankar sir is speaking, I I'm not in this discussion. I'm not present. So I want Dr. Seshadri sir to little bit more elaboration on the drugs. Depends on the clinical conditions, so that we can at least choose before some drugs before sending to the psychiatrist, or we can give a right treatment rather than.
So, Seshadri sir, going on the same question that Dr. Gopikrishna is asking, one last question which needs to be discussed is, as a physician, what kind of red flag signs we should be picking up so that we realize these are the cases that should be handled by a psychiatrist rather than a general physician or a cardiologist. And also, if you could, I know you spoke about medications in very detail, if you could just give a brief summary of what are the medication options that we have for these patients. Seshadri sir.
Yeah. So I think when we are looking at treating sleep, whatever is the pharmacological agent that we are looking at, we need to understand it is not for life. It could be still considered for life if the sleep issue is a part of other psychiatric morbidity, wherein treating the psychiatric morbidity is going to be if it's a chronic illness, needing indefinite medical management. But otherwise, ideally, whatever be the pharmacological agent that you're going to choose, ideally you want to give a short course and gradually taper down the dosage of medication. I think in a routine clinical practice, whether it is alprazolam or clonazepam or lorazepam, these are the commonly available benzodiazepines. We generally don't use nowadays diazepam as much for management of primary insomnia. So either alprazolam, clonazepam, or lorazepam and zolpidem. I think these could be 4 go-to drugs for any individual. I mean, I'm assuming that when you're looking at, you have probably ruled out other medical comorbidities which may be impacting the quality of sleep. You are not looking at other psychiatric comorbidities as well. You're not looking at somebody with a major depressive disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, alcohol abuse, other anxiety spectrum disorders. Now, it's a pick. You could pick any of these drugs. The only thing what is also happening is we see people are not prescribing just a benzodiazepine, but we end up mistaking. So, not to support or comment on any brand, what I would very commonly see is this drug called as Nexito Plus and or an Nexito Fort. Sometimes you'd wonder whether the patient has a primary insomnia or a Nexito deficiency syndrome, which is getting addressed by prescribing. So Nexito or escitalopram is a more definitive anti-anxiety, antidepressant medication, which has certain implications. So recommendation is look at a short course of a benzodiazepine, taper it off and see how things are going on. If things are going on well, period, your other advice on lifestyle modification, physical exercise, sleep hygiene, and all that, and leave it at that. But if somebody is having the need to be on regular and long-term benzodiazepine, otherwise they're not doing well, that's probably a time I think we need to get a psych consultant so that we make sure we are not missing out any other comorbidity, not just looking at a primary insomnia, but looking at other psychiatric comorbidities. The second thing is if somebody is coming in with clear-cut emotional symptoms that you are able to see in your assessment, you are able to notice that there is significant anxiety, which is not getting addressed by your reassuring counseling. You see they are coming back with a lot of non-specific symptoms. You feel psychological factors could be there. Probably that's another case scenario when you need to get somebody. If somebody is very clearly coming in very agitated, somebody is talking of self-harm and suicide, I think that's a red flag where you are not the one who should be prescribing something and they should probably be seeing somebody. I think this is what we would probably look at. Prescribing any drug is fine. Now, if one feels that, look, also this is the challenge because a lot of our cardiologists and friends who have said that, look, I want to send this patient to you, but he doesn't want to see you. He doesn't like this word called psychiatrist. So he's okay with coming to me for a number of times, and that is a realistic challenge because a lot of times, unfortunately, because mental health and psychiatry also get stigmatized, once as a clinician you're recommending somebody, many people don't accept it very easily. I mean, that is the challenge also, which is inherently there. If that is not the case, go ahead with the benzodiazepine, any one of these drugs. But if you feel that this is a gentleman who probably has some emotional symptoms, some anxiety and depression that you are able to make out, then consider one of the sedating antidepressants that one can think of, because they may be more safer and better, because the benzos only work on sleep and probably cutting down anxiety. But drugs like mirtazapine, it is available as 7.5 mg, 15 mg. You can start at those particular doses. Give at least a couple of weeks time to see what is the response that is taking place. And if they're doing well, and if you still feel that they are not going to go back and seeing a psychiatrist, and you've considered starting an antidepressant, give it for at least about 4 to 6 months. And then when you're weaning them off the antidepressant, make sure you're weaning them off and not doing a sudden discontinuation. Engage with the patient that we have initiated a medication for you, but once we stop it, if you think that there are relapse of symptoms that is happening, then you probably need to touch base back, hopefully with a psychiatrist, but at least come back and talk to us. I think this is what briefly we should be looking at.
Thank you so much, Seshadri sir. I hope, Dr. Gopikrishna, your question got answered. Certainly, there are medication options and there are a lot to choose from. And lot of it will be patient-centric, lot of it will be depending upon what kind of scenario we are dealing with. There was one comment about mental stress, oxidative stress can lead to microvascular angina. Dr. Jeswani, that is very much acceptable hypothesis that can explain atypical chest pain. The only way to prove is to do an angiogram. They respond to deltaism and corandil. Certainly, if we are dealing with a microvascular angina, if we can prove it with a non-functional test, then we can go through the management, then we can go through the line of management of microvascular angina. Definitely. In this particular patient, this is one very, very rational way of thinking about symptom management. Anybody else has got any other questions or comments about this topic? It is 8:01. We'll start closing the session. Dr. Shankar, you have anything to add?
It is a challenge in our clinical practice to treat elderly patients who come with insomnia. What is your suggestion, sir, regarding what are the safer drugs to be given at a low dosage? Dr. Seshadri.
Yeah, again, Dr. Shankar, we need to see what is the duration of this insomnia. So the differentials could really be anything. Somebody who has a chronic insomnia, somebody who has been benzodiazepine dependent, somebody who has, I think you mentioned, restless leg syndrome, nocturnal cramps. So, I mean, looking at addressing what are possible factors. Number two, getting them to sometimes understand that as a part of sleep physiology as well, sleep duration is going to come down. But if you still must think that you want to pharmacologically treat and there is no anxiety, there is no psychosis, there is no dementia and dementia-related behavioral symptoms, if there is no cognitive impairment, then you could go again with a short course of a benzodiazepine. It could be again clonazepam or alprazolam. Again, we'll need to really see what was the onset of the sleep. Why are they presenting now with a sleep issue? If somebody comes to you now, 64 years old, and says that I haven't been able to sleep for the last 20 years, the implications are different. Somebody says I'm not able to sleep for 5-6 days, again, the implications are different. I think certain rules with psychotropic management in the elderly start in a very low dose and optimize the dose upwards very, very gradually. I would probably look at, so I had an 80-year-old gentleman whose wife I was treating for a long, long period of time. And he comes in with the last 2 months of just pure insomnia. And he says, there's no other problem. He's been doing otherwise psychologically well, cognitively well. I'm going to give him a benzodiazepine. I'm not going to worry at the age of 80 about him getting benzodiazepine dependent. I'm going to say next 20 years, it's all right if you become dependent. But if I had the same person coming in at 40, my equation would be very different. But elderly, any low dose of clonazepam lorazepam 1 milligram or maybe even half a milligram or alprazolam is okay to start off with. See how they are tolerating the dose. Next day hangovers are common. Also, we should make sure that we are not missing out delirium, which is causing a sleep-related issue. So I think that's what it should be.
Dr. Anup,
Yes, sir. So
can I answer Dr. Shankar, sir?
yes, sir. Please, sir.
Elderly people in general, when they have sleep problem, while keeping all that Dr. Shadri said, keep in mind one of the very common reasons why elderly don't sleep well is melatonin deficiency. So it's quite common in the elderly age groups. Give melatonin 3 to 5 milligrams 3 hours before bedtime. In addition to anything else you give for sleep, melatonin does help. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm just making notes of everything that is being discussed. One question that came is, can sertraline help in this patient with propranolol? Dr. Seshadri, does propranolol has any sedative effect? Do we use propranolol as a sleeping aid? I know sertraline as an antidepressant can be used, but how about propranolol?
Yeah, so propranolol, no to sedation, and sertraline does not give any sedative effect. Quite to the contrary, sertraline belongs to this class called as SSRIs. They can actually cause insomnia. So if you are treating sleep, don't treat it with sertraline. If you're thinking of treating an anxiety state, you might consider sertraline, but nevertheless add it on with one of the benzodiazepines like clonazepam or alprazolam. Over a few weeks, wean off the benzo, but continue with the sertraline for a longer period of time. But don't treat sertraline, don't treat insomnia with sertraline.
Sir, thank you so much. Any other questions or comments that is there on the discussion?
Anup is question to Dr. Sheshadri. Like the melatonin prescriptions are something which I see. Are they equally kind of addictive? Like we do not want them to take it for a long time, like what we heard. Benzodiazepine should not be. But can we kind of, without any guilt, write melatonin as a prescription?
Yeah, melatonin typically is not associated with the dependency. So yes, melatonin can be taken safely. It does not have much of a side effect thing. It can be taken in the long-term perspective. But again, we need to see if it's helping. If it is helping from a clinical perspective, then I won't hesitate in prescribing melatonin in the long term. It's quite okay.
Praneeth, to answer your question, melatonin is available as over-the-counter drug in the United States, and you can actually buy bottles which has got 200 to 500 tablets in one bottle. So just to give you an idea of what kind of safety that at least US pharmaceutical guys think about melatonin. So I would also concur what Dr. Seshadri said, that melatonin should be pretty much safe. Okay, we are running short of time, so we'll just try to close here. One question is mirtazapine, FDA warning about increased suicidal ideation. Santosh, I will answer that, and Seshadri sir, please correct me if I'm wrong. For that matter, any antidepressant can have a suicidal, increased suicidal thought, and that has to do with the phase when they are coming out of their depression. So I believe that any antidepressant medication will have this warning or this label of increased suicidal ideation, which typically happens early in the course. Salma asks, any tool with CBT which can help? Salma, CBT has been discussed. Dr. Seshadri mentioned that CBT is a directed and a very comprehensive course for which patient needs to come to a CBT expert, which currently we have very few. And this is something which, as I understood, is not going to be very practical in our aspect. Other question that came, which I don't know the answer to, is doxepin. Dr. Seshadri, how is doxepin playing role in insomnia treatment?
Doxepin is a tricyclic antidepressant which belongs to the same family as amitriptyl and tryptomer that we tend to use. Doxepin, all the tricyclic antidepressants, whether it's amitriptyl, imipramine, or doxepin, have a side effect of sleep. So we use the side effect as a beneficial effect. Younger age group with prominent anxiety or depressive symptoms, doxepin is is an option that can be considered. Avoid it in the elderly because of its anticholinergic side effects. Again, we need to know what are we treating. Are we treating an anxiety disorder which has sleep as its component, or are we treating a primary sleep disorder? But let's just assume if it's a primary sleep disorder and one wants to think of a little longer duration of use of doxepin, I think it's an okay drug to go with as compared to being on a benzodiazepine for a longer period of time.
Thank you so much, sir. And on the same line, I will mention, okay. The question keeps coming, what is meant by short course treatment? I think Dr. Seshadri mentioned for benzodiazepine, that will be 1 to 2 months. So when you are writing TCA from the cardiologist standpoint, I would suggest that if a patient has got an established cardiac illness, or if they are at a very high risk of cardiac illness, please look at their cardiac history before you prescribe TCAs, because TCAs can be implicated on rhythm disorders and can be often problematic in treating a cardiac patient. They do have interactions with cardiac medications as well. So while TCAs may be safe as a general, patients who have established cardiac disease, that too elderly, you just need to be a little bit cautious about prescribing that medication. That's the cardiologist version of TCA. It's 8:10, so we are certainly going to close now. Praneeth, your closing comments on today's session. Next 2 minutes will be done.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Seshadri, for enlightening. Common problem, abuse of benzodiazepines is there, and I should admit that even I do prescribe them quite frequently. And today's session highlights that we are not supposed to keep it short for the sake of getting the help, and emphasize more on non-pharmacological means on maintaining adequate sleep hygiene. Probably spending few more minutes with the patient goes a long way, and then always seek help with the psychiatrist that they may be having underlying psychiatric illness like anxiety, depression, etc., which might be contributing. And probably we should not shy away referring to psychiatrists, but yes, with a word of caution to the patient that it's only to help, and we're not labeling you as a psycho patient. Thank you, Anup.
Thank you, Praneeth. Thank you, Dr. Seshadri, and thank you all the attendees for attending today's session. Insomnia is certainly a very common topic, and I'm actually working upon a basic handout as a behavioral and sleep hygiene tool that I can hand it out to the patients. Once it is ready with me, I will share with my attendees, and you can give input on how to make it better. Thank you all for sticking 12 minutes past our scheduled time. Good night, and we will see you again next Wednesday. Thank you all.